Today, we're going to be talking with our partners on board. Our topic is recruiting and engaging an all-star board. And as we were coming in, you guys were giving me some comments that I know that's what you're looking for, some all-star board members. I'm going to show you how you can engage today before I turn it over to our speakers. If you are on, Lord, I'm going to say if you're on mute. See, you guys, we were talking about messing up at the beginning, and now I'm messing up. That's how it happens. I got them in my head. But you guys know you're on mute, and all you need to do is type your questions in the chat or put them in the Q&A. If you need the closed caption, just type at the bottom of your screen, click on that CC at the bottom of your screen. When you close this webinar, I know some of you have to leave early. There's going to be a survey that's going to pop up. We would love to know what other topics you'd like to hear about board governance and just any feedback you would like to give us. So I'm going to get ready to introduce our speakers. If we can go to the next slide. I'm excited to hear these guys. Brandon has already been laughing at me. So thank you for that, Brandon. I feel so much better.
I'm here for it.
Brandon Castle, he's a nonprofit technology consultant with OnBoard. And then we have Bradford Peters. He's a nonprofit technology consultant also on board. I've already been talking to them, getting some insights. You're going to love them both. So welcome both of you to TechSoup. The show is yours, Brandon.
Oh, I love it. Well, Aretha, thank you so much. TechSoup family, thank you for having us today. We're honored to chat with you. And really, that's what this is. This is kind of a fireside chat on some thought leadership. So we love collaboration. If you have something that you're kind of thinking on or stewing on, we encourage you to leverage the chat. That said, a little bit about myself. I spent 10 years as a minister here in St. Louis, Missouri, and a little bit of time in Austin, Texas. And then after that, really realized that I had a heart for nonprofit and just benevolence and taking care of folks. And so I started consulting with them on everything from fundraising to governance to accounting to culture and how do we shift those things for the positive. So thankful to be here, excited to dive in. But Bradford, I'll let you introduce yourself first, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brandon. And to everyone out there, hi, Bradford Peters. Just a little bit about myself. Very similar to Brandon, I was in Austin, Texas, still am too. So you might hear a y'all or two in the course of this conversation. But beyond that, I've been in the nonprofit and technology space for the better part of a decade at this point. So I got to help shepherd a lot of nonprofit organizations through those scary times in COVID during the lockdown. And especially when we made it on the other side of that, I've had the absolute pleasure of getting to work with hundreds of nonprofit boards at this point and really help digitize and optimize their management, and especially to make sure that they are putting together and assembling the absolute best team to accomplish their mission within the community.
Good stuff. Yeah, a little bit about what we're doing today. Y'all can read it, so I'm not going to summarize this too much. But at the end of the day, we believe that good governance produces good philanthropy and good mission and good impact. And so we're going to unpack that. It can be a bit of a nebulous topic. Let's get strategic on it, and we can talk about some microcosms of how we're going to just serve your team and how we can help push that agenda forward. We do serve about 2,000 nonprofits and growing quickly. It's our largest growing vertical here at OnBoard. We just make things simple. We are not reinventing the wheel here. Any good firm should not be. We're just trying to assimilate all the features that you need to govern well, so that, again, the trickle down economics of that good governance equals your people are served, your constituents feel loved and cared for and noticed. Quick shout out, we do have TechSoup pricing. So of course, if this sparks an interest further in what OnBoard can do to serve you, there will be information on how to get in touch with us and get some of that incentivized pricing later.
All right, so let's talk about today's goals and everything that we're going to really be reviewing and just having an open conversation about. So we're going to talk about some tough situations that nonprofits and associations can find themselves in as they look to bring in new members, and really what the downstream impact that can have on organizations if it's not done right. We'd like to really cover some processes and some best practices that ensure any search for a new board member is effective and, most importantly, is replicable. And beyond that, as we wrap up, we will talk about some tools that can help make a lot of it, or that can help prevent a lot of anxiety and ensure that the next individual that you tap to join the board is going to help accelerate in its growth and to help accomplish each of your individual missions. So
Yeah, so I think right now it'd be helpful to just do a quick poll. Sorry, Bradford, didn't mean to step on your feet there. We love to hear from you. This is going to help us get a picture of exactly who you are and kind of what you're facing at this point. So if you wouldn't mind in the chat, just throwing in a quick answer, what best describes your role on the organization's board? So how are you serving your folks currently?
yeah, would you see yourself as an administrator? So someone who is working behind the curtains like the Wizard of Oz, getting everything moving? Are you one of the board members who is showing up, casting votes, helping fundraise? Or are you that nonprofit leader? Are you setting the tempo of how everyone moves in accomplishing these goals?
And I will admit, y'all, I'm not scared of uncomfortable silence. Okay, so we'll wait a second, let y'all throw a few answers in here. Bradford, I've already said y'all, I think 3 to 4 times. So we've already checked that off our list. We're good to go.
I'm going to start putting quarters in jars for us. We'll have some good lunch money by the end of this.
Yeah, we're going on a trip after this. Love it.
Ooh, all right. I am actually really excited to see these results. I mean, I'm happy
Yeah.
for anybody showing up, but especially for the lead away answer being nonprofit leaders, 18 out of 31 people being those nonprofit leaders. I know that y'all are incredibly impacted by the board that your organization assembles to help get this mission done. So excited to really talk about this and how this is going to work for you guys.
Yeah, I think we're okay to move on from here and just let folks keep kind of chiming in on that. I mean, first and foremost, we want to have a bit of an open discussion on what are some of these kind of key risks or pitfalls. You know, I'll just put the elephant in the room out there. Once they're in, they're in. Once you invite folks into the gates as a board member, they're in. And depending on your bylaws as an organization, it may be really, really tough to push them back out of the gates. And so what we want to do is before we even get into those conversations about nominating new board members, let's outline what are some of those key things we need to be mindful of as we're starting to dive into the process. So Bradford, let's kind of cover a few of those things.
Yeah, so there's one thing I really want to speak of on this list, and all of these bullets are fantastic, but let's really talk about the pitfalls of poor recruitment in terms of who you could bring on. And that's really taking a step back before this process begins and figuring out where is our organization on its journey? Are we a place that is just starting out? We're entering an era of growth or hyper growth in the community. What if we bring someone in who is a very seasoned professional, who has a great mindset, who is a good fit on a character base for the team, but they're coming in from somewhere that's a little bit bigger, that maybe just wants to hold their position within the community? What if you get someone who is focused on really risk management and a conservative viewpoint from growth that could halt a lot of your well-earned momentum? Think about how that is going to track over the course of a 2 or a 3 year term if you have someone that doesn't want to push, doesn't want to search for grants and wants to maintain, as opposed to getting someone that is on that exact mindset trajectory of being a cheerleader, of being a fanatic, and heading a lot of projects up that could drastically alter where your organization is going to be by the end of that term. Something to really think about.
Yeah, well said. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, a lot of what you'll see here, and you'll hear this term often from me, is that the culmination of these things is that they play poorly in the sandbox with others. And that's a key factor of how we operate as a nonprofit. Is there unanimity, at least in what we're trying to do, not necessarily in the process on how we get there. That's the purpose of a board, is to provide that necessary friction. So we outline the appropriate plans for action. But if they can't even exist within that environment with decorum, oftentimes it will kind of make everything fall out from there. So there are some huge risks.
There's one other point that I just want to talk about regarding recruitment and especially the overall recruitment process. And you know, I go by that old adage, the best time to start something was yesterday, the second best time was today. Good recruitment, a very good recruitment process. Certainly, it's something that we can all jumpstart and begin a search for today. But those boards that find the best team, those boards that assemble all the right skill sets and mindsets that leads to an effective organization, it's like putting time in at the gym. You can't all of a sudden get in shape if you go for 8 hours in one day. It just helps. Even if it's 20 minutes every couple days, you're going to end up in much better space. So recruitment and looking for these people is something that we should be putting just a little bit of effort into every single month, so that when it comes time to find someone, we might already have that pool of best fit candidates already, which is just going to make that process of terming someone out and bringing someone else in all that much quicker, all that less stress inducing, all the more effective for you guys.
Yeah, well said. So another quick poll here. What's your biggest challenge when it comes to recruitment? And we know that some of these answers may not fully encapsulate the specific struggles that you're going through, but this will give us a bit of an idea as you're pondering through either expanding your board or filling a seat that has become void. What is the biggest hurdle to you and your team right now? And again, this is going to help us create a little clarity around our conversation moving forward.
I know that I might be a little bit biased in the tech space, but I just keep seeing data-driven decisions. That's where my mind goes about how we do this. This is what happens when you start working in the nonprofit tech space for a decade.
Yes. Yeah.
All
Wow.
right. Pretty clear and ringing results by almost 50%, over 50%. I mean, we have lack of a defined process, which, just so everybody knows, you're in a good space. It is a place where a lot of organizations could use some pointers. That's what we're going to be talking about for a good chunk of the rest of this call.
Yep. If y'all see me, I promise I'm not cleaning my ears. I am plugging in my headphones for y'all. So even when you work in tech, it always decides to throw you a little bit of curveball. Impact of recruitment decisions. Couple thoughts here. Wrong fits, not to surmise these too much, but what we've often seen is that when you get somebody that's a wrong fit into that sphere, they will often be divisive. So that's something to be mindful of. Like, how do these folks interact with the other people that we have delegated authority to? Can they play well in that sandbox? A bit of a microcosm from the sphere that I come from. So excuse some of the terminology, but we found oftentimes poor fits on our board tend to manifest as being self-serving. And so for them, it's a resume builder versus something where they can expand the mission of the nonprofit they're serving on behalf of. They often struggle to articulate the goals of that organization. And that might be a great litmus test for you, even as you're starting to embark on, do we feel like this person is the right fit long-term for us? Or are we evaluating somebody that's a potential fit in the future? Can they clearly articulate what moves the needle for you and your team? Bradford, I don't want to steal the show, man. Filter in as necessary.
Okay, so I was actually reading a survey published by Wild Apricot a couple days ago, and it profiled and pulled all of these leaders across the nonprofit space. More than 40% of nonprofits stated that they struggled to recruit the right candidates, quality board members who are passionate about that nonprofit's cause. And really think about that for a second, because there can be people who want to help the community out, but there's going to be a big difference over time if you are, say, an organization that is focused on helping financially strapped people get into higher education institutions, that we want to help education with youth, and you bring on someone that is focused on feeding the community and is focused on food banks. Over time, even someone who wants to help might not be able to get your specific mission accomplished. Hopefully, we didn't just lose Brandon long term there, but it is something to think about, how even people that want to help some good might not best align with everything that you guys are trying to do. Oh, hold on one second. So let's talk about the overall impact of a healthy board recruitment process. And again, this is going to be something that ideally starts before someone's term is coming up. It is something where, again, I like to have my data mindset on here, where we are actually tracking and listing out all of the information that we need ahead of time. And what happens first? We want to take some time and really analyze our current board as is. What are the skills that everybody is bringing to the fore, and where are the gaps in the armor? Do we need someone to help fundraise? Do we need someone to help throw more galas? Do we need someone who can help in terms of operations with our organization? Figure out what gaps we need to fill and where we really need to augment. Sometimes just because we have one grant writer, someone who is chasing a bunch of large donors, doesn't mean that we don't need two. But there are also times where if we do a good analysis of the board as it exists, we know Frank, who's doing a bunch of fundraising, is absolutely knocking it out of the park. We're seeing a lot of big growth. Do we need to start thinking about shifting our priorities and figuring out, hey, how can we potentially do a merge with another nonprofit or another organization in the area and really combine our strengths together? Do we really want to take the time to figure out where certain committee heads are in terms of progress year over year? And maybe we need to find someone who can help. Oh, Sorry about that. Apologies. So let's take some time to actually look at all these data points and then really figure out what questions do we need to ask in the process to determine who is going to fit these skill sets. I have seen organizations that have done interviews with board members, and they have very innocently, very innocuously talked to person A and asked these 5 sets of questions. And then they spoke to person B, and in that interview, they had 5 completely different sets of questions. When it comes time to find a new board member, what they're going to be doing is unfortunately comparing 2 completely different sets of information that don't actually speak and show who is going to be the best overlaid to accomplish this mission. So really make sure we're taking that time. Do we know the questions that we're going to be asking? Have we also underlined the commitments and the tasks that each of these board members need to bring to the fore? Do they need to fundraise to a certain amount? Do they understand the time commitment and whether this is going to be a job that has a monthly meeting plus 2 biannual meetings plus events happening every single month? Are they ready for that time commitment? Because you could get those folks that just want to sit in, cast their votes, and occasionally bring their expertise. And if we aren't checking for that, we could end up with a candidate that thinks they're a good match until they get to that very first board meeting and things change. Brandon, I'll throw this over to you, sir.
Yeah, thanks. And I appreciate all the grace as we work out a few tech issues on our side. Elements of a strong process, without knowing exactly where you're at, Bradford, I'm actually going to send it back to you because I was not able to hear anything you were saying, but you looked fantastic while delivering. So
I appreciate that. It did take me upwards of 30 minutes to figure out which vest worked best today. I think we covered this. So we just want to talk about what questions are we going to ask? What skills are we looking for? Have we underlined the commitments, the responsibilities, and the goals that these people need to bring in? If we can start to bring this into the interview process and make sure we are checking off every one of these boxes along the way, we're going to really close that gap and ensure that as few hiccups and snags as possible happen during the recruitment process. All right. So let's talk about a real world scenario. Let's say that we have Marcus right here. He has served the board, and we are getting near the end of his 3rd year. We're coming close to the end of term. So we could be in a situation where maybe we haven't tracked this information well, and all of a sudden we've realized, oh, with 45 days left in Marcus's term, he is about to head out. Do we need to jumpstart this process? How the heck are we going to do this? We cannot have a board member not exist for the next month. We need to rush through this. Now, you could very easily talk to the other board members, know who their friends are, know who they recommend within business, but thinking about a best practice, have we posted on Facebook? Have we posted on our blog or a newsletter to start to get the word out that we might be looking for someone? Have we utilized networks like LinkedIn for nonprofits or BoardNet? Have we reached out and seen if there are any other sites that can help pair associations and organizations with leaders in the space to really widen that talent pool out so that we're not just looking for someone within the immediate vicinity of our organization, but we are really doing a thorough scope of the city, the state, the country, the community to bring in those right people and get these processes started.
yeah, well said. And one thing I would even add to that are having some honest conversations internally about, do we actually want to replace this board member? Sometimes bylaws will mandate that you have a certain amount of folks that serve, but also times that's not a prerequisite. And you may have an opportunity here. And so I would say encourage open conversation amongst your existing board members as whether we need to fill that seat or not. I think from there, another thing that we can also do is simply don't settle for the easy pick. And that's easier said than done, right? But build a diverse candidate pool from a thorough search. It's so easy for us to lean heavily on our own internal network, which is great. A lot of times those folks love us, they care deeply for the mission, but they may not serve us being diverse, getting a plurality of perspectives on what actually we're trying to do. And it can create a bit of an echo chamber, especially in scenarios where I have worked pressed in ministry. That is one of the pitfalls of ministry boards and committees, is that we often look to folks that see things and reason through things in a very similar lens as we do, and at the expense of not having a plurality of perspective. And then we arrive at very predictable decisions, and it can be a very dangerous thing. So don't take the easy route as much as it seems applicable. There's a lot of life in going through a very, very thorough search.
Yeah, there is no way I can better underline what Brandon said, but just to echo this, diversity of mindset is key.
Mhm.
And beyond that, let's even say that we have led through this process. We are asking the right questions. We are doing a search for what kind of skills are going to help our organization best. What else can we do? One of the most effective things that I have seen nonprofits do, even as they're selecting things, is to bring on potential candidates into a board meeting so they can see exactly what is happening. They can understand exactly what conversations are going on. What are the other personalities that they're going to be encountering? That can really help in case there's a little bit of a culture clash. And they're going to have a better understanding of exactly what they're potentially walking into. It's also a really good time where you can just check the rest of the team and see, hey, what did we think about Frank? Hey, what did we think about Alice? Once you start having that meeting on the side to talk about who you're going to finalize, it's going to keep everyone even better informed than just hypothetically looking at the answers to questions. But beyond that, let's even say that you've brought on someone, they have the right skills, they have the right mindset. Onboarding afterwards is going to be critical to ensuring that you get an effective board member, because if they don't have something like even a mentor, if they don't have easy access to bylaws, if they don't have easy access to minutes in meetings and past decisions to help ground and bring context to what's been going on with the organization, they can drift. And you can take an onboarding time of maybe 3 months, and it can extend out until 6 months, 9 months, a year, until they truly feel comfortable in that role. It is a very good best practice to assign that person a mentor, maybe also so they have an understanding that they will need to ment somebody in the future. And honestly, to put some goals in front of them that is going to be the measure of their success within the first year. These are some good strategies to avoid those initial pitfalls into
Mhm.
recruitment.
Yeah, Bradford, other thing that I would add to this, and it really encapsulates 6, 7, and 8 here that you're reading on your screen. Um, Cast a clear vision of the role. I know that seems obvious, but specifically within the philanthropic space, we see a lot of times where board members are brought on and they are completely unaware of the fact that there is a fiscal ask of them to raise money on behalf of the organization, which can create, at the very least, tension. And much worse potentially. And so casting clear vision is crucial. We used to throw around a statement within leadership spheres in my neck of the woods. It's actually a proverb that says, where there's no vision, the people perish. And I like that because I think it denotes this idea of you can nominate everybody you want to be on the board, but if you have not casted a clear vision for what the heck we're here to do and how we're going to accomplish that, you're DOA. And so, again, just to invoke that thought, be sure to be clear about what you're expecting from this role, fiscal asks, timing and allocation asks. What are you expecting from them after hours? Many of these teams are volunteers, so we want to be sensitive to that and cast a clear vision for how we're going to conduct ourselves.
Mhm. There's one other adage that I do want to say right before we start getting into the tools of this, and it's simply this. You are only as good as the people you surround yourself with. And it's something that we intrinsically know. Just within this space, the market has spent more than 150 billion with a B annually in recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
We know that it is vital to get the right people in. So we need to make sure that we are treating this with the importance that it deserves. So spend that time, get those 20 minutes in the gym every single week instead of the 8 hours that one time in the year right before summer rolls around. Invest in this process because it is going to invest right back into you tenfold. So
Yep,
let's talk
that's right.
about enhancing some recruitment with governance tech.
Yeah. And I think this is the good news part, right? This is the fun part of the sermon. Okay. You get to the end and it's like, if this seems daunting to you, I've got good news for you. There's ways that we can create shortcuts. There's ways that there is for lack of a better term, an easy button to get through some of these things. It doesn't all have to live between your ears. So let's unpack that a little bit here.
Mhm. So first off, just having a place where you can have an easy to locate central repository of information, whether that's the bylaws, whether that's the minutes, whether that is marketing material and videos that have been posted on YouTube about your organization's work. You want something where someone can easily come in, do their homework for the first couple weeks, and then by the time that first board meeting rolls around, they are already up to speed. You need a place that has that information centralized. That's something that OnBoard is able to provide. And honestly, at this point, you need something that you can very easily get locate information with. So make sure that you have that AI build out. Make sure that you can pull up single words. Make sure that you can pull up meetings with an easy search. That's going to help everybody. That's going to shave months off of onboarding.
Yeah. And again, this is to meet our team where they're at. I think it's healthy to cast expectations of involvement and engagement. But if we're not meeting them halfway there, these folks are volunteer. They're often serving out of the abundance of their time, their wallet, their mental capacity. It's so funny. We'll talk to folks that, in one sentence, they'll say, I'm really struggling to get my board to engage. But the second sentence will be how apprehensive they are about creating a one-stop shop ecosystem for their board to operate within. And it's like, well, maybe let's put those two things together. No harm, no foul, right? Everybody goes through that metamorphosis as an organization, but realizing, hey, I have to create an ecosystem for these folks to dabble in if I'm going to expect higher output from them. So really a one-stop shop governance platform. And there's lots of folks out there that do this. OnBoard is not the only game in town. We think we're good stuff, but there are ways that you can begin to assimilate all these different things that are needed to execute good governance and good recruitment into a one-stop shop.
All right. So this one's pivotal for recruitment. It's pivotal for succession planning. And that is just being able to easily and automatically track where the board members are in terms of their term. A lot of organizations that I've talked to, that information is hidden in the back of one cabinet or another. It is within a folder, within a folder, within a folder of the back of some hard drive. And that's what often leads to these really stressful succession plannings and recruitments, because they aren't really checking that very actively. And why should you need to? You have someone who's coming in for 1,000 days, but you don't want that to sneak up on you. And you want to have a place where you can just very easily click in. We can see that Sarah's term is going to be coming up within the next 3 months. Let's start doing the homework now and not rush this at the last second.
Mm-hmm. Every successful sports team I've ever followed, which is maybe one or two because I'm not a sports guy, but they always are very, very cognizant of who's in a contract year and who's going to be gone next year and what deficits will that lead. And so it's not a surprise to them when they have to fill that seat with somebody or fill it with a specific skill that they're losing. The worst thing you can do is be surprised. And so this is going to help you know the who and the what and the when of that conversation surfacing.
Yep. And we spoke about this before, but it is worth underlining because every single recruitment conversation that you ever hear is going to bring this up. Board composition matrix. Figure out those skills. What do we want to augment? What do we want to bring in that's new? Let's overlay this with our current members. More importantly, let's overlay this with prospective members and just figure out, is this person going to help us fill in that giant gap of armor that we want to have? And if not, as nice as they are, as good as they are, we have to make sure that we are offloading them and getting the right people in to get that mission accomplished.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, get creative with this. There's a lot of key terms that you'll track on folks to make sure that you're diverse, and those are pretty predictable ones. Are you good with nonprofit compliance? That's an obvious one. But what might not be obvious is your entire team is a bunch of extroverts. What does it look like to gauge how do these folks reason? How do they engage? How do they socialize? That might be worth tracking. I encourage my clients all the time, track their distance and proximity to the actual kinetic board meeting, because if you're valuing a culture of in-person meetings, it's unfair to induct a person who lives more than 50 miles away from the office, right? So it's those little things that we always want to constantly be taking a self-audit of to make sure that we're staying on top of our values.
I'll even throw this out here. Use it to figure out what zip codes, what area codes do we have on the board. If we want to see true community representation, it does not hurt to spend a little bit of time and get a matrix showing just that. So if you are serving your city, if you're serving your tri-county area, you have that representation from every corner, because that, as Brandon spoke to earlier, is directly feeding into diversity of mindset, because you are getting views from every place you serve.
That's right. This is huge. So one of the things that we have taken an extreme focus on is making sure that we are a diverse and equitable and inclusive company, but also that we encourage that for our teams. And there's a couple reasons why. Number one, we believe it to be ethically right and good. And so that deserves no predication. It deserves no justification. It's the right thing to be doing. That said, there's also some logistical implications of making sure that your team is diverse. Many of you are aware of this, and many of you are a small nonprofit. Funding is just about everything. And one of the prerequisites now that we're seeing across the board is that in order to be accepted for a grant application or even certain tax subsidies or tax statuses, you now have to issue reporting on your board that says you are in compliance with NASDAQ 100 DEI metrics. That's not an easy thing to have a conversation around. For what it's worth, those are very sensitive personal things to people that they need to self-disclose. So just tracking it in, a notebook might be difficult, but track those things, because at some point you're going to be asking for a large grant that's going to open all kinds of doors for you. But a prerequisite to that is making sure you have an exportable list to say, hey, here's how diverse our team is. We're not just a one-person show here. We have a diversity of thought. We're not going to be poor stewards of this money. So we're a safe place to give this money to. If you're a new nonprofit, this is extremely big, and it's a new kind of initiative. You're not going to, if you've been in even the development game for a long time, this wasn't something you necessarily had to think about 10 years ago. But now, if you're dependent on any type of grant revenue, you need something to track DEI metrics.
I'm actually going to come over the top of that because I was working with a really good nonprofit out of Houston right before Hurricane Harvey hit, and being able to track and report on things like like board diversity is important for grants. But even as this slide is showing, having a visual component to tell that story makes your case all that stronger. These people that dole out grants, that provide funds, they can take some time and they can look at an Excel file, but to have something that just gives you that really easy graph breakdown that puts it in whichever colors are particular to your organization, whichever is going to be eye-catching, that helps tell the story all the stronger and helps get those funds in so that you guys can continue to do the good in the community that we know you're doing every single day.
Yeah.
So board engagement, I think this can be a pretty powerful tool right here. And certainly we want to make sure that it's, information that is kept anonymous so that people feel comfortable, that they feel like they can give some real honest feedback. But it is a great way to pull members and figuring out what are we doing good? What can we do better? And what are some big weaknesses that chairs, presidents, board leaders can do to change how these meetings are, what events we're focusing on, what projects we're focusing on. Let's get that direct feedback to figure out what do we need to patch so that we can spend the rest of the year absolutely knocking these goals out of the park and really meeting those strategic points that we set at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. And creating a culture where that's received well is maybe another thing to cite here. These are logistical items that we can do to make sure that our team is engaging, but creating a culture and a safe place of saying, look, we know we're not doing everything right, but we want to get better. So instead of chastising you when you say we're not doing something well, which there's a way to do that well and there's a way to do that poorly, but encouraging a collaborative environment that says after each meeting, we're going to ask you what your thoughts were. And we're going to kind of put it out there on the line. That's a risky thing to do. But if there wasn't something that you liked or you feel like we can be more effective in, let's create a safe place where that's able to be voiced. That's the only way we get better.
I'll also throw this out here, just having a tool that can really easily have votes happen, get surveys out. And I mean, we could be talking about things as easy as getting food catered in for the next meeting or looking at different offers for where you're going to hold an event. Being able to just get all of this information out and have it so the data comes back and is so easily trackable is a way to just keep that momentum going in between these monthly meetings. If you want to talk about enhanced board engagement, it's about having the tool that can allow this work to happen easily, effectively, and analyzably so that you guys don't lose a step in between those meetings.
Exactly right. I would say this boils down to relying on actual data and not a hunch. Hunches are sometimes right. That's a good thing to have a hunch. But without the data to back it up, those conversations get awkward quickly. If you have a board member that's engaging poorly, it is a very different conversation to say, hey, Bradford, it seems like you're not bought in here. What's going on? Are you okay? It's an okay conversation to have, but that's a very different conversation than saying, Bradford, I've noticed you've been taking kinetic votes on things for the past 6 months, but you've never once opened the board book.
Mm-hmm.
How are you able to possibly cast an informed decision on things that impact the lives and well-being of our constituents if you're not even reviewing the criteria we're voting on, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a different conversation that's informed by data and then allows you to be not intrusive, but direct with these folks and increase output, increase engagement. Or maybe a conversation that needed to happen for a long time can now happen. Yeah, you're right. This isn't a good place for me. I think I probably need to term out here. Again, we want to foster healthy conversations, not stifle them. And good data is always a good way to predicate a healthy conversation.
I also think it's worth noting, just for the graphics that have been thrown up, I think it's worth noting that if you had a tool that was able to just analyze where a lot of time was spent eyeballing certain parts of the book, if we have, parts 1 through 10 of an agenda, And we know that there is a lot of interest that's consistently happening around like point 4, quarterly operating results. We're doing that big review. Does it help to know this ahead of time so that, hey, maybe we want to shave off time on some of these other topics? We really want to make sure that we expand out this part so that when the conversation happens, we can allow a really productive conversation to happen to make sure that we're hitting off every point that has all the interest and we're not spending a lot of time speaking to things that are quickly glossed over within 2 or 3 or 5 minutes. Again, it's ways to help mold these board meetings so that you guys are having the best and the most productive conversations on the market.
Yep, absolutely.
Board engagement. Let's talk about this. So I think this would just overall be, this is our messaging. Would this just being able to have conversations continued outside? Brandon, I'm going to hand this off to you.
Yeah, man, I love it. So I think at this point, we're talking about maximizing the margins between meetings, right? So the reality is we have 2-3 hours together, maybe a month, if that. So what do we do in that marginal time, right? So I think it's the ability to communicate and not get into a reply all war. It's the ability to ensure that there are levers to pull if everything that we had hoped to accomplish in a board meeting wasn't accomplished. And this might be a slide ahead, but one of the thoughts here is our ability to say, hey, per our bylaws, we're supposed to vote on a $10,000 or more purchase. We didn't get around to that yesterday. So what does that look like? Are we just kind of in a holding pattern as an organization until the board can find time to get this done? Well, no, good board engagement software will offer you those kind of pull in case of emergency levers where you can say, you know what, we're going to send out an e-vote tonight and make sure that this purchase happens in time because it has to happen. It's little things like that where a good piece of software or a good tool that you're able to use will ensure maximum productivity, both in the meeting and in those margins between those meetings. So obviously we want to hear from you. We're not here trolling for business. We're here to help educate. That said, if there's anything that you feel like OnBoard can do more specifically, whether it's consulting, we don't charge you for that. We just want to speak to you. Or if it's looking into specific ways that we can use technology to arrive at better decisions, that's cool too. But we are a no pressure organization. We literally just want to serve the 501 space. And so we would encourage you scan this QR code, reach out to us. One of our professionals will reach out to make sure that your team is communicated with, shepherded well. And again, we're just anxious to hear from you.
Coming over the top from Brandon one final time. Again, we are here to help. And right, this is not a place where we are trying to sell anything, but I know from the 3 years organizations that were really dealing with COVID, I was having calls every single day just about what resources were out there that I could help direct them to. Where were places that were giving away funds? Where were places that were giving away materials to help local communities with their missions? It is not a waste of time for us. We are here because we like helping organizations that help the community. So just give us a call. It's okay.
Yep. Yeah, well said. That said, I think we want to pivot now to a little question and answer. Full disclosure, we may not be able to get to or specifically address every question, but we have already seen a few. If you have a question that you'd like to submit now and we can dialogue a bit about, please submit that now. But Bradford, I don't know if you and I just kind of want to start cherry picking a few questions here and see if there's something we can help address.
Yeah, let's just take a quick look and see what stands out.
David, I see you saying, as for a defined process, is there a process for finding people to talk to or and consider for the board? Hint, I'm technical, and so I'm not great at networking. Totally get it. I think, yeah, you got to leverage your network, but maybe if your network is too limited, expand that network. What does it look like to go sit in on a Chamber of Commerce meeting and listen to local business leaders in your community and see if there's crossover in mission or an alignment? What does it look like to go to other nonprofits, right? Let's not be territorial, but rather let's view this as holistically, we are serving our community together. So maybe someone from their board can also come serve with you. Always trying to flex that network muscle and get out of our kind of comfortable spheres. It's the worst and best thing ever, I promise. It's going to expand your network. It's going to take a little emotional toll from you, but you get used to its muscle memory. But that would be one of my first ways that I would counsel you is just get out of your comfortable zone, get into some spheres that have a little bit of alignment and some local business leaders within your community. Chambers of Commerce are great places to go hang out for that.
Yeah, local and municipal organizations are fantastic, but I will again say BoardNet USA, Bridgespan, LinkedIn for Nonprofits, Idealist. All of those are fantastic resources that help match industry leaders to organizations in need of recruitment?
Mm-hmm. See, interesting question here. Are there pitfalls to watch out for or considerations to think about for public announcements of board recruitment searches? So in other words, kind of like almost like a job posting to say, hey, we're looking for somebody. Use discretion, right? When you open up the gates to people that you're not really aware of, there's place for that, but you have to be extra thorough then if you're saying, hey, we welcome in the conversation that you might be on our board. P.S. We have no clue who you are, what you represented, if you have a criminal background, like all these different things that might be relevant to whether they can actually serve on the board, right? So use discretion. I always say be intelligent with it. You don't just want to blindly cast out a huge net that may not capture the clientele or the folks that you're trying to gather. So be strategic with it. But I do think that's a way that you can potentially expand your network.
David actually had another good question I want to talk about, which is just what's that 20 minutes a month that we could do to help find board members? So some of this could indeed be networking. It is having some of those conversations and stretching ourselves a bit, but let's say that maybe we don't want to be the most extroverted yet. We want to make sure that we have a lot of foundational stuff ready. I think that, again, what we can do is really figure out what are these questions that we want to be leveraging in this interview and recruitment process. What does the actual onboarding packet and material look like when we get someone on? What are those bylaws? What are everything? What are those minutes? Or again, we can just take a look at, let me gather up all of the past minutes of the last year and have these assembled so that the newest person can come on. Do we even want to pick out like, hey, at the top of every quarter, we're going to maybe just be bringing new people in just so they can get a sense for the board? It's all just these little things that when put together, make that process flow so much easier, so much less stressful.
Well said.
Mhm.
Here's a fun one, which I don't know what our answer will be, Bradford, but I'm cool taking it on. How do you politely ask if your board members with a seat option to renew versus term out are looking to renew or not? Culture is everything. Be aware of your culture already and work daily to create a culture that allows for that conversation to happen organically. If that's blunt force trauma, it's going to be a difficult one because people are left to assumptions because there's no prior context for them to pull on and say, you know what, I know Bradford loves me. He's been a seasoned veteran of this. We've been working alongside each other for a long time. That question has merit and it means something for the organization. So of course he would ask me that. If there's no relationship there, it's going to be a tough one. So maybe the answer, at least from my perspective, and I'm partial, so take it with a grain of salt, but relationship covers over a multitude of awkward conversations. It really does. And so if you can foster that relationship, foster that culture where tough questions are asked, but they're done in love and they're done for a purpose, I think you can get away with asking them that. And I think it's okay to hide behind missional impact, nothing personal. Just say, hey, this impacts people. We need to know, and we need to have a firm accounting of who's here and who's not going to be here. What's this look like for you in the future? So don't be scared of that conversation. I think that's a healthy one.
I don't think I could say that better, so I might just take a new question if that's okay. But
Do it.
Yeah, Tracy Gordon had a good question, which is who should be responsible for new board member onboarding? Is it organization staff or is it the current board current board president? Now, this is a good question. It's one that I'm worried doesn't have a one-size-fits-all answer because certainly there's the difference between an organization that maybe has 15 or 20 board people on it. And there could be someone who is really seasoned, has shown time and again after serving for a while that they effectively know the ins and outs of the board and they can bring someone up to speed faster, as opposed to maybe a board that's just starting out, maybe hiring their very first few members. So it's going to depend a little bit, but I think what you could do is really see who has this experience, who has the right alignment mindset, which is again why we might want to start bringing potential recruits onto that first board meeting, just so we can see who they fit best with. And really, once we've outlined the kind of information that folks need to know to get up to speed fast, is pairing them together. And again, I think a really good best practice is going to be having these initial goals, whether that's saying that you're going to be fully read on these materials within the first 2 months, or you're going to be leading conversations within the first 3, and working through that and doing some check-ins with folks. Additionally, if you do have different committees and you know that we're going to be bringing in Sarah and she is going to be on the fundraising committee, dang it, the best person to help bring her on to speed is going to be the chair of that committee. It is going to be the person leading that group. You certainly want to make sure that we are bringing as much specific role experience into play with this when making these decisions as possible.
Yeah, well said. And Aretha, if I'm reading correctly, you wanted to chime in as well on that one. So I want to make sure we don't step on your toes if that's accurate.
No, no, you guys keep going forward.
Love it, love it. Excellent question from Clarissa. How would you recommend responding to the board's stance that only new members should be local residents? I think I'll draw upon a story that's about 3 sentences. I once was the recipient of an email about a decision in an organization that I was working for that I didn't like. And rather than responding to that and being like, hey, what the heck is going on here? I don't like this. I went to the folks that were in charge and I said, listen, I understand that from my neck of the woods, I probably don't have all the data that you have. And I'm sure there's a reason for this. So can we have a dialogue so that I can better understand the data that informed this decision that you made? And let them kind of explain. And you know what I realized in that story is I realized I didn't have all the data, and it made total sense that the decision they relied on was the actual decision that should have been made. And so perhaps that helpful context when you open that conversation with the rest of your board illuminates, here's why we only want new members to be local versus kind of existing members. But I would say there's no hard and fast rule on that. That's a unique thing to your organization and to your local geography. And so lean into that internal network to get a little clarity there.
Ooh, I think Tej has an interesting question of what would you do in the case of board members stealing money from projects? These positions are purely voluntary and not to be paid and not paid anything. So one thing I would like to touch on before we give this real meat of the answer is, again, part of this initial board recruiting process, part of the things that we should be outlining when speaking to people is the underlining about compensation. It's the underlining of benefits. If this is going to be a pure payless role, which so many organizations have, let's make sure we have that underlined. Make sure that this is a point that is spoken of ahead of making that offer to someone, because there are some very lucky board folks out there that are getting annual dispensation from this, and we need to make sure that these candidates understand exactly what they're getting into. Now, in the case of board members stealing money from projects, I think this is a pretty upfront conversation that needs to be had in terms of talking about overall expectations and getting a realignment on this. And if these folks aren't going to be comfortable doing this work for free, tough conversation might need to be in hand, because you want to be able to find the people that are absolute mission zealots for this, and they will do this for 0 pennies in the bank. That is what makes up a good board, is the people that don't need payment. They're driven purely by mission focus.
Yep. And I would echo too that what your board does is going to reflect on you whether you like it or not. And hence the discussion of good recruitment, right? If we have a board member who's involved in illegal activity, there's going to be a lot of folks that look at your nonprofit as being complicit in that illegal activity. And you might even lose certain statuses, you might lose certain funding. And so again, emphasis on get a process, guard the gates with your life, make sure that whoever we let in is someone that we can depend on for a while. That said, if they are involved in illegal activity, you need to deal with that. And it might be involving law enforcement. It might be having a direct conversation, because again, these are things that can compromise your 501c3 status. There are things that can compromise grant allocations. And furthermore, could get you into some pretty big legal trouble. So make sure they're stealing, make sure it's actually theft. But if it is, you need to take action on that very quickly.
Let's see. So I think
Michelle,
oh,
Michelle has an interesting question about working board versus guiding strategic board. I'm going to admit I might need a little more context on what you're kind of looking for as far as the difference in approach. So if you're still here, Michelle, and want to chime in a little more context on that question, I think Bradford and I can help answer, but right now it might be a little vague. We'll wait just for a few minutes to make sure there's no other questions. That looks like something Bradford and I can chat. CE, we always want to be aware of specific kind of tech questions. I'll be transparent with you. That's kind of not the forum today. So we are always happy to have a sidebar with you about integrations and APIs and all that fun tech sphere stuff. That said, you leverage that QR code that's on your screen now, and you can get in touch with one of our folks to actually talk about the tech implications of that question.
Let's see. We got an update from Michelle.
Michelle, would you like to be unmuted so you can ask your question? I hit the allow you to talk. You don't have to come on camera, but you can ask your question so they can better understand. There you go.
Hi, I just earlier in the presentation, you were talking about, selecting board members that will do grants for you, selecting board members that will run events for you, selecting board members that will do this work. And that's what our staff does, our team does. Our board members provide guidance, connections. They don't specifically have fundraising goals, but they'll go out. We happen to be a faith-based organization, so they'll go out to churches or other organizations to speak about the work we do. But
That seems
so
fairly normative.
Yeah, it's just some of the recommendations were kind of like, well, that seems like a staff job.
Sometimes it is. You'll find, especially the smaller the organization, the more hats the board is going to wear. And so again, depending upon the size and the scale of you and your team and your board, they may wear some of those kinetic hats and actually show up to events and, kind of kiss babies, shake hands, do the whole thing. In a lot of larger nonprofits, we see it almost in like a congressional manner where they're the ones implementing the infrastructure law, but they're not out there building the bridge, right? And so I think it's important to kind of know the nomenclature and know the understanding of the role between your board, the size and the scope of what they do. I would say more often than not, it is typically not the board that is out there running an event or running fundraising unless they're a GET board and they're tasked with a certain number every year. That's another thing that's probably worth conversing over at some point. But I would say it's generally pretty normative that they're not involved on both sides of the house.
That said, if we were looking for how to figure out the best makeup of a board that is occupying more of an advisory role and really just there for expertise, I'd say let's get that composition matrix. Let's figure out what expertise we want these individuals to speak to. What are the fonts of wisdom that are going to inform the staff's work that they're doing, and really ensure that when these recruitment conversations are happening, that they are checking that box 10 out of 10. That's going to get you the right kind of strategic board to help you out from the sounds of it.
Yeah. Gene, I love this question. Here's why I love it. How can we support board members in other ways than compensation? Are gifts allowed? Not sure on gifts. Again, there's a lot of kind of rules and regulations depending upon even location and your bylaws that allow and dictate for that. So that's more of a nuanced question. But what I would say generally is creating a culture of honor. And part of that is sharing in wins. When the board does something right, we have to be on the front lines being their biggest fans, because often they're on the front lines for everything but the win. When a decision goes poorly, when revenue is down, when fundraising is down, when there's extreme churn in staff, they are often the ones that are looked to and are left holding the bag for that and feel culpable. And that's fine. That's part of the nuance of leadership. But what I would encourage you to do is look for those kind of low-hanging fruit of like, hey, we exceeded our fundraising goal. We need to throw a little something for our board because they've been at the helm guiding and shepherding us through that process. And so give them stakeholdership in the wins just as much as you give them stakeholdership in the losses. It looks like that's the question. So, or at the end of the questions, but that said, of course, if you all have any more questions, we are more than honored to chat with you. Again, this is something that we do out of an abundance of just love. We love doing this stuff. It's not necessarily to move the needle financially. And so if there's anything we can do to serve you or your team or get in touch with your board to talk strategy or talk shop, we're down for that. So please leverage the QR code. At the end of the day, we just want to be a resource for you. So Bradford, any other thoughts from you as we close down?
Oh, not too many other thoughts from me. I just want to thank everybody for their time. I want to thank everybody for some absolutely fantastic questions. And I just want to say, I look forward to speaking with anybody after this. I know that Brandon and myself, we get a kick out of this. This is better than a cup of coffee in the morning for me. So I'm just looking forward to some continued conversations. And I'm just excited because I know that you guys are moving and shaping every single community out there. You deserve to be shouted out more. And I certainly hope this was worth your time because you guys all deserve that.
Yep. Keep fighting the good fight. We're with you.
Mhm.